There is this really fascinating and honestly sometimes painful phenomenon in software
Oh,
development.
yeah. I know exactly where you're going with this.
Right? Like you spend weeks writing this really complex piece of code. You test it extensively in your local environment, that safe, cozy little IDE on your machine.
Yeah, your own little sandbox.
Exactly. And it executes flawlessly. I mean, the logic is elegant. There isn't a single error in the logs. It's just perfect.
Because the environment is entirely controlled, right? Like, you dictate the inputs, you manage the dependencies, and there are absolutely no surprises.
Right. But then comes deployment day. You push that exact same code to the live production environment and the real world just hits it.
Yeah, that's when the chaos starts.
It really is. Suddenly you have like thousands of concurrent users throwing completely unexpected inputs at the system. You get these wild server load spikes, bizarre edge cases you never even dreamed of, and the whole application just crashes.
It completely breaks down.
Yeah, it just hangs.
And what's really crucial to understand here is that um, the system failure wasn't actually caused by bad logic. I mean, the code itself was perfectly sound.
Right.
The failure was caused entirely by environmental pressure. It's that lack of adaptability to unforeseen variables.
And for you listening right now, as you prepare for your very first international IT interview, this dynamic is incredibly relevant.
Absolutely.
Today, we are doing a deep dive into a really comprehensive stack of sources. We've got excerpts from career coaching dialogues, guides on the cultural strategy of interviews, and these specialized glossaries of tactical
A
idioms.
lot of great material.
It is, and the recurring theme across all of it is that your technical skill set, your ability to actually write the code, that is your local environment.
Yes, you know your stack, you're sharp.
Exactly. But the interview itself, that is the live production environment.
That is where all those unexpected variables are introduced. Like a hiring manager asks a question you didn't anticipate, or, the cognitive load of translating your technical expertise into English suddenly hits you.
And that's where the system crash happens.
Right, because succeeding in a high-stakes IT interview, it really means knowing how to sell your code just as well as you know how to write it.
So our mission today is to equip you with the exact linguistic tactics, the structural frameworks, and the cultural insights you need to prevent that crash.
We're going to get into how to confidently self-market and really engineer your answers.
Yeah. Interestingly, though, one of the absolute most powerful communication tools you can deploy in a high-pressure interview, it isn't actually a clever phrase at all.
No, it's not.
It is the strategic use of silence.
Which sounds counterintuitive, right?
Yeah.
But before we get to the mechanics of silence, we should probably look at what happens when a candidate fails to manage that environmental pressure.
Yeah, let's start there. The coaching transcripts provide a pretty stark illustration of this.
They really do. There's this one scenario featuring a talented developer named Mark and an HR specialist named Alex.
Right, I remember this one.
Yeah, and Mark makes a very vulnerable confession during this coaching session. He admits that while his technical skills are rock solid, the moment he has to actually articulate his career experience in English, he gets, in his own words, terrified and totally freezes up.
Looking at Mark's choice of words there, the word terrified just feels incredibly intense for a professional business setting.
It's a strong word, definitely.
Like, if I'm an interviewer looking to hire a senior developer and they tell me they are genuinely terrified, I mean, I might actually worry about their ability to handle the stress of the job itself.
That's a valid concern, for sure. But linguistically, within the context of a coaching conversation, it is actually a highly effective choice.
Oh, really? Why is that?
Well, think about the alternative. Most candidates just default to these generic, sanitized adjectives. They say things like, oh, I get a little nervous, or I feel anxious.
Right, the standard PR answers.
Exactly. And those words are so overused, they've basically lost their semantic weight. But terrified, that is visceral.
It grabs your attention.
It does. It signals a really high degree of self-awareness. It creates this immediate, authentic human connection because the candidate is naming the exact emotional hurdle rather than just trying to hide it.
Ah, so the interviewer actually recognizes the honesty in that moment.
Precisely.
Hmm.
But the real focal point of Mark's struggle is that phrasal verb he uses to describe his physical reaction. Freeze up.
Yeah, the freezing up.
The sources define this as a sudden physiological paralysis. Basically, the adrenaline hits, your cortisol spikes, your working memory just wipes completely clean, and you literally lose the gift of speech.
You just can't access your vocabulary at all.
Right. It's completely gone.
I have experienced that exact sensation, and honestly, it is a literal buffer overflow.
That's a great way to put it.
It really is. A computer system gets too many concurrent inputs, like you've got heavy background applications running, a massive file downloading, some complex rendering going on, and the CPU just hangs. The screen freezes.
Yep.
For a job candidate, you have the baseline processing of just trying to recall a project from 3 years ago. Then you add the processing power required to translate those complex technical thoughts into English in real time.
Which is huge.
Right. Then pile on the sheer psychological pressure of sitting across from a hiring manager who holds your career trajectory in their hands. I mean, the buffer overflows, the system hangs.
And the coaching material provides a really fascinating explanation for why this overflow happens to candidates like Mark.
Okay, what do they say?
Well, it rarely has anything to do with actual language proficiency. The crash occurs because candidates are attempting to recite a pre-written script.
Oh, wow. Yeah. They write out the perfect answer the night before, they memorize it, and then they try to just hit play on a recording in their head.
Exactly. And memory is incredibly brittle under pressure. If the interviewer's question deviates even like 10% from what the candidate anticipated, that rigid script is suddenly useless.
The brain is just frantically searching its mental database for the next sentence, fails to find a match, and boom, the system hangs.
You got it. So the recommended antidote in the sources isn't to just practice memorization harder.
What is it then?
The antidote is shifting from recitation to storytelling.
Storytelling.
Yeah. When you tell a story from your own lived experience, you aren't retrieving a rigid string of text. You're recalling a fluid memory, which requires far less cognitive load.
You know, shifting to storytelling sounds great in theory, but reading through these cultural strategy guides, there's a massive roadblock here for a lot of international candidates.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially those aiming for Western tech giants like an EPAM or a Google. Telling your story requires this radical mindset shift regarding self-presentation.
We see a severe cultural clash in the data on this point. Yeah, in many parts of the world, particularly in Eastern Europe or the CIS region, modesty is just ingrained in professional culture from day one. You are taught to elevate the team, minimize your individual glory, and really just let the quality of your work speak for itself.
Right. The expectation is that, if you write brilliant code, management will naturally notice and reward you.
Exactly.
But the guides are incredibly blunt about this. In Western corporate environments, that modesty will actively hurt you during an interview.
It will. The ruling philosophy there is self-marketing.
Self-marketing, okay.
Yeah, the hiring manager is not going to dig for your accomplishments. You have to place them explicitly on the table. And the sources point out a very specific linguistic habit that candidates really need to break.
The pronoun thing, right?
Yes. Candidates constantly use collective pronouns. They
Right.
say things like, we developed a new microservices architecture, or
Right.
we scaled the database to handle the new load.
And they need to change that.
The candidate is required to switch that pronoun and say, I developed the architecture.
Man, I really struggle with this one.
A lot of people do.
I mean, if I sit in an interview for an hour and repeatedly say, I did this and I solved that, I feel like I'm going to come across as intensely arrogant.
Right.
Nobody wants to hire a glory hog who doesn't respect their colleagues' contributions.
That discomfort is universally common among international candidates.
Hmm.
But we have to look at the actual mechanism of a Western job interview.
Okay, what do you mean?
The hiring manager isn't evaluating your humility. They're actively trying to mitigate their own operational risk. They are not hiring your previous team. They're hiring you.
That makes sense.
So if you say, we scaled the database, the manager is secretly wondering, okay, but were you the senior architect who actually designed the scaling solution? Or were you just the junior developer who monitored the logs while someone else did the heavy lifting?
Oh, wow. I never thought of it that way.
Yeah. Using I provides factual, verifiable evidence of your specific contributions.
So I need to stop framing it in my head as bragging and just start viewing it as data delivery.
It's exactly data delivery.
I'm just handing the interviewer the exact data points they need to justify hiring me over the next person.
You are drawing a clear boundary around your specific impact. I mean, you can still praise your team's overall mission, but you must own your individual lines of code and the specific problems you personally solved.
Okay, let's assume I've conquered my modesty. I'm ready to use I and claim my impact.
Good.
But the danger now becomes rambling. Like, if I'm supposed to tell a story about a complex technical problem I solved, I could easily talk for 15 minutes just explaining the background architecture and all the legacy code issues.
Oh, easily. It happens all the time.
So how do I condense a massive 6-month project into a tight 2-minute answer without losing the technical weight?
The universally recommended framework for engineering your answers here is the STAR format.
Star.
Yeah, it functions as an architecture for human communication. STAR. It stands for situation, task, action, result.
I mean, I've heard of STAR before, but it often gets taught in a very, I don't know, generic high school career seminar kind of way.
Right, very basic.
So if I'm an IT professional talking to a highly technical hiring manager, how do I actually apply this without sounding like I'm reading from a textbook?
Let's look at a technical hypothetical to see how it works. Imagine the interviewer asks about a time you overcame a significant technical hurdle.
Okay.
A poor, unstructured response would be something like, well, we had an old database and it's getting really slow, so I migrated to the cloud, and it got faster.
Yeah, that's pretty weak.
It's vague, it uses we too much, and it lacks any real impact. But using STAR, you engineer the answer.
Walk me through it.
The situation is the specific technical context. So you say, we were running a legacy on-premise PostgreSQL database.
Setting the scene.
Exactly. Then the task is the specific problem you needed to solve. We were hitting a 90% CPU bottleneck during peak hours, which was causing critical transaction timeouts for our users.
Okay, so you've established the stakes and the constraints. What does the action look like?
The action is where you heavily leverage that word I to describe your technical logic and decision-making.
Ah, bringing the I back in.
Right. So you say, I designed a phased migration plan to move us to AWS Aurora. I wrote the automated Python scripts to handle the data transfer during off-peak hours to ensure zero downtime for the client.
Wow, okay. And then we reach the result, which, looking at the guides, they emphasize this phase heavily.
Very heavily.
The story is completely useless if you don't stick the landing, right?
Without the result, you have basically just provided a list of chores. The result is the ultimate proof of your value.
Give me an example of a good result.
You would say, as a result of that migration, transaction speeds increased by 40%, and our overall infrastructure costs dropped by 15%.
You know, this framework maps so perfectly to writing a clean function in code.
Oh, how so?
Well, when you write a function, first you declare your variables and set up the parameters. That is your situation and your task. You are just establishing the state of the environment. Then you write the core logic, the algorithm that actually does the heavy lifting. That's your action.
I see where you're going with this.
But none of that matters if the function doesn't return a value at the end. The result is your return value. If there's no return value, the function is just useless to the rest of the program.
That is a brilliant way to conceptualize it, actually.
It just clicks for me.
And if you build your communication like you build your code, technical hiring managers will implicitly understand your logic. And delivering that return value ties directly into a crucial piece of corporate vocabulary that was highlighted in our glossaries.
Which word is that?
The word deliver.
As in the ability to deliver results.
Yes. In a corporate context, deliver means fulfilling your promises, executing the project, and producing a tangible outcome.
Getting it done.
Exactly. Companies are fundamentally looking for engineers who can deliver results, specifically. And this phrase appears constantly in the sources, under pressure.
Under pressure. Why is that phrase such a heavy focus? I mean, the servers are always on fire somewhere, right? Isn't pressure just a given in IT?
It is a given, which is exactly why it addresses the hiring manager's core psychological fear.
What fear is that?
Well, when a deployment goes terribly wrong at 2 a.m., a manager needs to know they won't have to hold your hand.
Ah, okay.
So by structuring your answer to highlight a high-pressure situation, the independent actions you took, and the successful result you delivered, you were actively dismantling their fear of having to micromanage you during a crisis.
Okay, so we've got the STAR framework. We know how to claim our achievements with I, and we understand what the hiring manager is actually afraid of.
That's a solid foundation.
But the live production environment is inherently unpredictable.
Yeah.
What happens when the interviewer throws a complete curveball?
It happens to everyone.
Right, like a technical question or a behavioral scenario you totally didn't prepare for. You know you need to build a STAR response, but you realistically need a few seconds to figure out what your situation and task actually are.
You need processing time to write the function in your head before you can execute it out loud.
Exactly. But standing there in absolute silence while staring at a hiring manager over a Zoom call, it feels agonizing.
It really does.
Especially with like video lag, silence makes you feel like the connection has literally dropped. The buffer overflow just starts creeping back in.
And this touches on one of the most fascinating cultural myths detailed in our sources regarding the perception of pauses.
Oh, right, the silence thing.
Yeah. Culturally, in the CIS region, candidates often view falling silent after a question as a sign of absolute failure.
That's the reflex, yeah.
The internal monologue is basically, if I stop talking, I look incompetent. I look like I don't know the answer.
So the reflex is to just start making noise. You just start talking immediately, even if you have no idea where the sentence is going, just to prove you are engaged.
Exactly. But in Western corporate culture, like the US, Western Europe, the perception of silence in a professional setting operates on an entirely different metric. Taking a deliberate, thoughtful pause before answering a complex question is actually perceived as a strong indicator of intelligence and seniority.
Wait, really? A pause actively makes you look smarter.
It does.
I need to understand the mechanism behind that. Why does silence equal intelligence?
Think about the difference between how a junior developer answers a question versus senior architect.
Okay.
A junior candidate often blurts out the first thing that comes to mind, right? They're anxious to please and terrified of dead air.
True.
But a senior architect, they listen, they internalize the parameters of the question, and they take a moment to formulate the most efficient path forward.
That makes total sense.
So a pause signals to the interviewer that you are treating their question with respect. It shows you are thinking strategically about your response rather than just rattling off a memorized script.
I can appreciate the strategy of looking like a senior architect, definitely. But tactically speaking, how do I actually execute that over a video call?
It can be tricky.
Like, if I just stare into the webcam unblinking for 8 seconds, it's going to get weird very quickly. How do I initiate this pause smoothly?
The linguistic guides introduce a really tactical concept called buying time. You don't just sit there in dead air. You use specific, polite introductory phrases to grant yourself the literal seconds your brain needs to formulate that star response.
Ah, so you give the system a loading screen.
Exactly.
What is an example of a phrase I can use for that?
Well, the sources highlight one incredibly specific, highly recommended maneuver for this exact situation.
Let's hear it.
When faced with a difficult curveball question, don't use a generic filler like, oh, that's a good question.
Okay.
Instead, you say, that's a stellar question.
Stellar. Wow, that is a very deliberate, slightly unusual word choice for an IT interview.
It is, and its effectiveness is layered. Stellar literally relates to the stars, but in a business context, it means outstanding, excellent, or top tier. When you deploy stellar instead of a basic word like good, several things happen simultaneously.
Like what?
First, it instantly separates you from the 50 other candidates who all just said, good question.
That makes sense.
Second, it demonstrates a highly confident, sophisticated command of English vocabulary.
It kind of breaks the interviewer's autopilot, doesn't it? They're used to hearing the same generic responses all day.
Exactly. And third, it subtly flatters the interviewer. It validates their intelligence for having crafted such a challenging, insightful question.
Oh, that's clever.
But most importantly, saying, that's a stellar question. Let me think about the best example from my experience to illustrate that. It gives your brain 4 to 5 crucial seconds of completely acceptable professional silence.
Wow.
You use that time to align your situation, your task, your action, and your result.
It's an incredible strategic maneuver. You are complementing them while secretly servicing your own need for processing time.
Yes, exactly.
You are managing the pacing of the conversation, which, as we established earlier, is the hallmark of a senior-level professional.
You are taking control of the narrative rhythm.
So let's pull all of these pieces together for you listening as you prepare for the big day. When you transition from your local testing environment into that live production interview, don't let the unexpected variables cause a system crash.
Right. Keep that buffer from overflowing.
Remember that nerves are totally natural, but relying on a memorized script will only lead to freezing up. Tell your own story.
And embrace that cultural shift.
Yes, lean into self-marketing by confidently using I instead of we to present factual data about your impact. And when you outline those achievements, engineer them using the STAR framework: situation, task, action, result, to prove without a doubt that you can deliver outcomes under pressure.
Perfectly summarized.
And perhaps most importantly, never fear the pause. Use a sophisticated phrase like, that's a stellar question, to buy yourself the processing time you need, and just let the silence do the heavy lifting.
It really is a comprehensive toolkit for getting your foot in the door and securing that offer. But, I'd like to leave you with one final thought to ponder as you prepare.
Let's hear it.
We spent this entire deep dive focused on using the STAR method and strategic pauses purely as tools to win over a hiring manager.
Right.
But think about what happens once you actually land the role. Once you are operating in that live production environment every single day, how might using these exact same storytelling frameworks and these exact same intentional silences fundamentally change the power dynamics in your everyday team meetings?
Oh, that's an interesting angle.
Or perhaps even in your future salary negotiations. If a deliberate pause makes you look strategic and intelligent when you're just a candidate, imagine the leverage it provides when you are the one holding the cards.
Definitely something to mull over as you prep for your interview. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.